up and sit down.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the DwnFwdPUNCHcast, episode 8. Right?
Episode 8.
All right. I'm your host, Jason Saris, and with me is David Reed.
That's me.
Today, we're going to get into gaming and if it has finally gone mainstream. I think this is going to be an interesting topic to kind of get into, but I think in order to set this up, we want to talk about first, why hasn't it been mainstream up to this point? And I think you've mentioned some things about it before, so I'm curious what your opinion is. Why don't you think gaming has always been mainstream?
I just remember being like a kid in junior high, elementary school, whatever it was, and like if you played games, you were kind of a nerd, and there were a lot of people that didn't play games. I don't know why. That's just how my experience was, right? And but that was also like, I don't know, like almost 20 years ago, something like that. But anyway, I was almost kind of like, I had a lot of friends that played games, you know, and you met friends obviously through games, and but for some reason there were a lot of people that didn't, right? Like they were like the sports people, and they were like, oh, you play video games, you nerd, in your own basement? You're like, yeah. And you're like, you're a loser. Do you know what a girl looks like? I'm like, I saw Samus once. That was cool.
I finished Metroid quick enough. I saw her in the bathing suit.
Right. But yeah, like. But now it's like games are everywhere. I mean, shoot, they're becoming an Olympic sport at the Chinese Games in like 4 years or something. Like it's going to be an e-sport or something, you know, whatever. Yeah, gaming is mainstream. It's everywhere. ESPN has it on there.
It's fascinating to me, though, because I remember, being in middle school and Mario 64 was out, and me and one other kid that I knew, I remember during shop class, we'd be in the middle of making a table, and you had to work with a partner, so we're like, hey, let's partner up. We could talk about how many stars that we got. And because, at the time, you don't know how many are even available. You couldn't just hop on the internet and figure out,
It's true.
For all you know, it's like, all right, well, I have 100. How many you got? I have 110. I know that there's at least 10 more now. It was such an exciting feeling.
Right.
But you didn't announce that to everybody because there was this weird stigma to playing video games because there was the perception that was for kids or that you were that creepy, greasy guy in your parents' basement. It's a really seems to be a more recent thing. I think that almost even
came after. Like the creepy, greasy guy thing came when MMOs came out, right? Like I order pizza, I never leave my basement, I just play MMOs for 12 hours a day, right?
Yeah.
But like like it's funny because if you think about it, we were in the high point of gaming, right? Into a lot of people's opinions, right? And then we're going to get into that statement in itself is essentially my argument against yours, okay? Like the high point of gaming is because I'm old and I think that we never experienced really anything better than what we used to have. Now that's not entirely true, but what we had was like these libraries that were just, it felt like they were endless and nothing was bad, right? But now it's like there's a game for everybody, where the games before really weren't made and catered towards people. So but I don't know. I felt like maybe you were just like not necessarily like a greasy, creepy dude in your basement, but you were just kind of like antisocial maybe. Or instead of doing like normal things like sports or, chess club or whatever it was, you were sitting around playing games in your basement, and that just wasn't a thing,
Yeah.
But that was still a successful time for gaming. I mean, they were selling systems like crazy still. But for whatever reason, there was a stigma out there, like you said. So.
Yeah, and I think you bring up an interesting point because I agree with you that the scope of games was probably a lot narrower then, and I think that contributed to it. When you think about titles on the NES or the SNES, I mean, it probably wasn't until, I don't know, like the early 90s where games actually had like a decent story to them. Otherwise, it was, you think of your Pongs and you think of your Pac-Mans and all these things that were pretty casual by nature. Yeah. And maybe that just kind of gravitated, or younger audiences gravitated towards that. So to be an adult or to be, an upper teenager and still being interested in that almost seemed like it didn't make sense. But now it's much different, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, these are epic games with very involved storyline. It's like a movie.
Well, and the games are now almost catered towards demographics in a sense too. Yeah. It's like we know this group of people really likes this kind of a game, and we know that there's a large group of people that really like to shoot things, so we'll make games for them and stuff. And then there's of course like your group that likes classics and stuff. So like all these games with storied histories, right? They just keep building and building and building. and you see things where it's like, and I like to think of Zelda as a really easy example, because it's like there were times where people were lining out at 8 in the morning, 100 people outside of a store waiting for Ocarina of Time, right? Because Zelda was still a big deal. It was the first 3D one to ever come out. And then shortly after that, somehow or another, gaming became mainstream, I feel like, right around the N64, PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 era, where, that line, instead of 100 people, was maybe like 20, and then maybe it turned into like 5, but they were 5 in the afternoon. Like, no one was waiting outside the gate anymore. And you saw something like Zelda like kind of maybe fall apart a little bit, in a sense where like maybe the excitement wasn't there. There's always going to be people that love it and think it's the greatest thing ever. But then like you have now, it's like, here's this new Zelda that everyone freaked out about, and like it's so highly rated, and yet you can talk to anybody about it. It feels like Zelda's back on the map. Yeah. And I'm just like, wow, it's nice to see like this little transition, because I always started to feel that maybe because gaming went mainstream, some of the reasons that gaming became what it is today disappeared, along with, just your cookie cutter, action game, shooting game, racing game, sports game, right? Whatever.
So when do you think it happened? When was the turning point that brought gaming from being a child's thing or a dorky guy in the basement thing to being something that was more all-encompassing?
Probably PlayStation 1.
Think it was about the PS1?
PS1, maybe PS2 era was probably at the high point of when things started to really transition, I think. Okay. Because enough people got PlayStations, and, they were experiencing, and let's just take this for a general demographic sense, right? So you had like all these like sports games that came out that were legitimate sports games, like the stuff we played on Genesis. Those games are great, and they actually it's still good. Like the old NHL games, like Genesis really had the sports genre down, right? Super Nintendo wasn't so great at it, but and then PlayStation 1 came out, and I feel like they just hit an entirely new type of crowd, right? You had like combat racing, like Twisted Metal. You had your adventure games that like dawned this era of like exploration, like Tomb Raider, right? And these are all like games that really kind of came out in the very beginning, and then they created like this whole, like progression forward. Gran Turismo was like defined racing games for the longest time. Yeah. Need for Speed made the action racing game big. All the sports titles, Madden became huge at that time. Outside of, even though it had already been being made for like 10 years, it became huge because it looked realistic, right? I actually had this but this conversation with somebody today. This little kid was like, PlayStation 2 looks like crap. The graphics are crap. And I was like, man, I'll never forget the day that I saw Madden running on a PS2 and thought that was real life. And I'm like, now, obviously, there's no way. But like, that's what I remember. I was like, oh my gosh. But you got to remember that, you look back on it. It's easy to see something in 20/20 vision when you look back. But man, was that amazing. So I think around that era is when PlayStation 2 made things look real. PlayStation 1 started to open up the genre to more realistic stuff, but to give you a taste of what was to come.
I agree with you that the PlayStation 1 era seemed to be a stepping stone, but I don't know that I would consider it when things went mainstream. I think if you look at this pragmatically, there are different ways. I'm trying to look for tangible ways to consider when that turn may have happened.
And I think that's fair.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, when where were consoles like just exploding in sales? Where did budgets for games make a huge turn?
I wish we could erase everything I just said.
Okay. We can.
We can.
Oh, yeah.
So console went mainstream probably during the Wii.
You think?
The Wii is the highest. We don't have the facts. The Wii is one of the highest selling systems that's ever been created, right? It got people that didn't play video games to play video games.
Okay.
That like this thing was in nursing homes. It was in your grandparents' house. It was in your parents' house. It was in your aunt and uncle's house who never played a game system ever, but now they heard Wii Fit was a cool thing and kept them in shape, and they bought into that, whatever, right? But then there were also the gamers that wanted to play this, straight up like Nintendo classics. And the Wii got everybody to buy games. I don't think it was with PS1 and PS2. I think that helped, and you're right, stepping stones. I think we got it to the point where like everyone started playing. But if you want to go from the standpoint of like when did it become like part of our society, probably right after the Wii where everything, like, for example, systems were able to run like Netflix. Now, granted, the Wii also could do that too. But you were starting to get your entertainment from your game console, right? You could get internet from your game console, whether it was on handheld or on a system.
Yeah.
You were buying games digitally. There was a whole library of things out there, bringing back classics from the past and bringing you new stuff you'd never experienced before, right? And then now that everything just keeps looking more and more realistic, right? And it's becoming your home entertainment center. And there's esports and there's Twitch TV and like there's YouTube channels of people showing reactions to games or just watching other people play games. It is now ingrained in our society, yes.
See, I think I look at this from, again, I'm looking at this for more like a period of time versus a specific console. So I think that what generation would that be? Would that be we're in what now, the 8th generation of consoles?
Well, we can figure it out, but it's probably around there.
So I'm going to say the 6th. I think around the 6th generation time, and if I'm counting these correctly, the era that was PS2, Xbox, like the original Xbox, and what was that, GameCube at the time?
Yeah.
I think that, for me, I think that is probably the area where things started to turn, because when you look at sales numbers for all those generations, I mean, when we had some of the early generations, like your Generation 3, I think was 81 million units between all the consoles that were out at the time.
Okay.
Generation 4 was a little bit more at 93. Once you hit Generation 5, it spiked to 145 million units between all those consoles, which is a big jump. Then once you got into Gen 6, which is when I think there's that PS2, whatever, you're at 210 million. Like, there's a gigantic leap forward. So I think that hits the box as far as, like, when are people buying consoles. The other part of this is that PS2, I think, had a huge play in this, because that was the first time where there was disc drives on consoles, obviously, before, but PS2 was your first Blu-ray player, and that's something that appealed. DVD, I mean, and that appealed to people that didn't have access to that before. And you started thinking, well, now this is an entertainment device. I'm into my media in general, and if I buy this thing, which is effectively pretty close in cost to a DVD player at the time, I can also get this gaming component, and it brought new people into it.
Absolutely.
And the Xbox, while the Xbox didn't sell nearly as well as the PS2 did, the Xbox was the first console that I think was really marketed towards an older demographic. They had that stupid Duke controller that was supposed to be...
The Duke.
That thing was supposed to be designed for a man's hands, like a large, like an older guy with big hands, whatever.
Yeah.
It was trash, total garbage,
Oh, that
botched up big
was
time.
awful.
But the intent was there, and you had everything. Like the design of the console was supposed to be edgier and for an older crowd, and the games were more... Xbox was known for having the more mature content.
True fact, it was made as heavy as it was so that your wife couldn't pick it up and take it from you.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
No.
No.
This is not true.
Okay.
Considering, she could barely lift the controller because she doesn't have man hands to play with the big boy.
I believed you for a second.
No, that's just so crazy. But, like, I could see that. It's almost like... It was the guy. It's just the controller stuff for Xbox was horrendous. But then remember when that small one came out?
Yeah, the
that changed everything.
It did.
Oh, that was great.
It did. But I think those were both elements to expanding the base, because I think even now there are still outlets that say video games are a kid thing, right? It's mainstream. I think that gaming is pretty much mainstream, but not everybody is on board yet.
Yeah.
And the common thing you always hear is that it's a kid's game, right? It's for children. And I believe a lot of that is because things were marketed towards kids. I mean, again, the games were simple. They had these very straightforward concepts, and controllers were tiny with little buttons, and everything was kind of geared towards children. But as these games started getting more, more mature and more advanced and whatnot, I think it started to appeal to an older demographic, and getting everybody on board, I think, was part of where that started to change.
Let's simplify it even further.
Okay.
Gamers had little gamers, and then their little gamers became gamers as well, which then increased the population and the amount of purchasing, because maybe dad was buying dad games for him, and maybe he was playing games for, like, him and, mom or whatever, like, whatever they like to play. But then at the same time, also then little kids were getting their little kids games, which kind of keeps, like, that cycle going, right?
Yeah.
So you created, like, granted, I found games when I was a kid, and then, like, say, like, I had kids, like, I would get my games into kids, or my kids into games. I'm not going to put my games into kids. That's bad. But anyway, but I think that has something to do with it too, right? That we were all exposed. I mean, what is it now? Like the majority of gamers are like in their 30s. That like, that's like the target demographic in a sense.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting too, because there was a time where the target was like 16, 17 years old. Right now, the average gamer is 33. Mm-hmm. That's who most games are made for. And 2 years ago, the target was 31. And the year before that, it was 30. It's like there's this group of people from a very specific year that is constantly being that group. And it's like our demographic. I mean, we're right there. I mean, we're the people that the market is following through. And to your point, we're having, kids now. You don't have any kids yet. But our age group is having kids now, and they're growing up, with a new perspective on games.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's like, granted a bunch of little kids, and then there's a bunch of teenagers already that have all had parents that played games, and that was their primary source of entertainment, and probably shared that with them. And then that immediately gets, I mean, if you're a child, how can you not love something that's, you're able to interact with, and, something happens on screen that you meant to happen. And that's cool. Like you're interacting with something, and shoot, that's why every kid knows how to use a tablet by the age of 4, and they're almost better at it than you are. It's crazy. True, yeah. But I think that that's a really huge factor too, is that, those people eventually had kids, and their kids now play games, and that's going to continue to grow and grow and grow, and it's going to get bigger and bigger.
Yeah. I think a large part of this has to do with the fact that games are made like movies now.
Yes.
Too. There was a time where the budget for a game was, $1 to $5 million, and now these games on average are spending $25 million on a big release.
Oh yeah,
a lot of times
motion capture, orchestrated score.
Yep.
Like a writing team that like writes a script. Obviously.
Yeah. The hiring of real actors. I mean,
right.
These are not video game actors all the time. I mean, you have big names that participate.
Yes. Well, big names in the game industry. Now, granted, don't get me wrong, like Kevin Spacey was in Advanced Warfare.
Right.
Right. So, like, you can have Hollywood actors in there, but then there's also, like, the gaming elite, right? There's, like, Nolan North, for example, Troy Baker. Those are, like, the two biggest, like, male voice actors that have been in a lot of games.
I had the privilege of meeting Troy Baker, too, as a quick side note.
Did you really?
Yeah. That guy is incredibly nice.
I want to meet him.
He's really, really cool. And you would think, being... I mean, I'm sure he makes all kinds of money, but being, the gaming celebrity that he is, because if you're into video games, Nolan North and Troy Baker because they're in practically everything. You would think that there could be this, I don't want to say elitist, but there could be this sense to them where
like you're just another fan, like go away.
Yeah, like that they know that they're, somebody that people recognize as this upper crust of video gaming. Didn't get that sense from him at all. Really nice guy. Very,
no kidding.
Yeah, very good dude.
I'll tell you, just his work as Booker in BioShock Infinite just makes me just like absolutely love him. I've never felt more involved in a character between him and Elizabeth in that game, and like the voice acting in that game is phenomenal. God, it was so good. He's amazing.
He's good in everything that he's in.
Nolan North annoys me though, only because he's like in everything. I'm just like, oh, okay. And he's excellent. I mean, him as Nathan Drake, he's incredible. You know what I mean? So it's funny because like Nathan Drake looks so realistic. I was just assumed Nolan North looks like him.
Yeah.
I'm just like, he's got to look like exactly like him. He kind of does, but yeah, like
but that's the hallmark of a good actor.
Though, there is kind of like a voice acting gaming elite out there as well too. But like, yeah, those people. I mean, shoot, those are two big names. I'm sure they don't charge a few bucks to record some audio for a game. They probably require a sizable chunk, But
all these, I mean, the amount of marketing that goes into it. I mean, these are gigantic properties now.
Huge.
And they're done like that for a reason. I mean, these companies, these developers and these publishers that put these games out there, they want to appeal to more and more people and lure more people into gaming. And the expectation is greater now because this has become embedded in our society in a new way. Sure. I mean, there are people that need to know what happens to their favorite character in the next, sequel to whatever game they have because they're invested in this character. The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past is a great game, but I'm not connected to that Link as I am more recent Links that have a lot more of a intense story behind it. I mean, a lot of that was just dialogue, whatever. To actually get more from these characters now, I think helps draw me into it, which draws other people into it for the first time, and you kind of grow that audience.
Well, that was such a huge thing with Breath of the Wild, is that they got voice actors in the game for the first time.
Yeah.
And but there's voice acting in this game, and like it's very well done. Like there's emotion behind some of these scenes.
Yeah.
And you know, I was sitting there and I'm just like, I can't believe Nintendo did it. But they went and they did it, and I'll tell you, like, I don't even know, had it maybe not even been as good as it currently is, I still think that people would have just been like, thank you for doing this. And they probably wouldn't even have cared. You know what I mean? Like, nobody knows the people that do the voices in the game, but they're great. And they add so much more to the story. This enormous world that in a sense feels so empty, but so filled with stuff, just gets like more personalized when you get to like interact with these characters that have names and voices. And, you know, and granted, not everything they say is voiced, but man, was that cool. That made me so happy.
Yeah.
You know? Like, finally, they took that step. I'm not saying they always got to conform, right? But just make little improvements once in a while. And they did. So, and I think, by the way, I read that future Zeldas will be similar to this game.
Good.
Thank God.
Yeah, Breath of the Wild is fantastic. I don't want to go back anymore. Like, once you had the taste, that is it from there on out.
And, you know, to make some relevance out of this, so we don't just get into Zelda talk for, you know, the 90th time, but to make some relevance of this, I mean, like one of the factors I hear, or the facts, I guess, that I hear about this game is that, you know, it's the third highest rated game of all time. That's a pretty big feat for a game that came out 2 months ago.
Yeah. Right?
And what was it like? It has like an average like score of like 95 or something. On like Metacritic, possibly.
I'm actually surprised it's as low as 95.
But I mean, for it to be like the third highest rated, and I think the games that are out there are Ocarina of Time, Grand Theft Auto 4, maybe, or 5. I don't remember.
5.
It's whatever it is. It's one of the GTA's, and then and Mario 64 is up there somewhere. But then I believe Breath of the Wild took the third place. So that's, you got 2 Zeldas and a GTA up there, and you know, that's pretty impressive. So that being the case, like, you really can't go anywhere without hearing about this game. And I think what is helping is that when a game like this becomes so big, it maybe helps draw some of those people that have not played it in a long time. Like, I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that are like, you're even one of them. Like, when's the last Zelda you played?
Majora's Mask a couple months ago.
There you go.
But before that, it had been a long time.
It had been a long time, right? But for some reason, this game got you back into it, right? And there's a lot of people like that. And that's cool because, yes, we may be mainstream. Things might be very cookie cutter and like, let's get this, same game that comes out every year, whatever. But then, like, there are still people like you that maybe can be convinced to go back and try something different again once in a while,
Yeah. And I think we see signs of it being mainstream in a lot of ways now, too. I mean, you think about, going back to the Zelda thing, well, everybody knows the Zelda name, even if they haven't played the Zelda game.
Yep.
I can ask my parents if they've heard of Zelda, The Legend of Zelda, and they probably couldn't tell me anything about the storyline, anything about what it's, how mechanics work, what it is, but I'm sure they would have heard of it.
They'd be like, "Oh, that's Robin Williams' daughter's name, right?" And be like, "No, Mom, it's yes, but it's also the name of whatever."
Yeah. Let's film you talking to your parents. We'll see if that's the
right. I'm sure that's
right.
not going to happen, but yeah.
But we see this. We're seeing more and more video game movie adaptations too.
Yeah.
Which I think is just proving the point that there is more of an audience for these things.
Sure. Well, they're also cash grabs. Let's be honest. When's the last time you saw a good video game film?
Never. I can't think.
Yeah, I don't know if there is one.
Is there ever been a really good video game movie? I mean, the Resident Evil movies are maybe okay, but
so bad.
A couple of them are all right, but they're very loosely based on Resident Evil.
Well, even originally, the first one wasn't even really based on Resident Evil, for God's sakes. It had Umbrella, and that was about the only thing that made sense. And Wesker shows up in like the 4th film. You're like, whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's ever really been a great video game based film. I think it's kind of like their curse, Like, for some reason, like, World of Warcraft was bad. Ugh. Assassin's Creed was bad.
Ugh.
Most of the Resident Evil films are terrible. Even a movie like Pixels that just doesn't really, it's not a video game based film, but it's like based on the concept of video games, was also horrible. It's like you just can't win almost, which is weird because if it's that mainstream, you would think, now granted they probably still make money because there's enough suckers out there that go.
I think the Resident Evil movies are good enough to get a pass. I mean, they're not going to be winning any awards, but they were watchable.
They're action films and there's zombies in them and they're fun.
But we're seeing more of those. I mean, they've just announced a handful of movies that were based off video games, and those are all coming out soon. Peter Jackson was trying to get a Halo movie up and running.
Yeah, I remember that.
That I think would have been
Probably good.
I would love to see one of these epic epic storylines like a Halo or a Legend of Zelda or a Metroid, and try to turn that into an actual movie. That would be a great,
Sure.
something to watch. I don't know why they're picking what was that Christian Slater movie, A Ghost in the Dark or
Ghost in the Shell?
Ghost in the Shell? No, that was more recent. This is a long time ago. Or Alone in the Dark.
Oh, was that a film?
Yes, and it was total.
What the heck?
Garbage.
They made a film for Alone in the Dark?
Yes. It was
A
so
series
bad.
that only 40 people that played old PC games know?
Yeah. It was very
Wow.
bad.
I remember when that game was being released, the pre-order bonus for it, instead of giving you anything, they just gave you $5 off the game. They were like, please buy this. Just nobody knows what this is here. We were forced to make this game, whatever. Alone in the Dark. I did see one great film. Now, it is argument. There's an argument that it's not that good, but I loved every second of this movie. Silent Hill. The Silent Hill film that came out was phenomenal. The sequel was garbage.
I definitely did not see the sequel. I think I saw the first one, and I can't remember any of it.
In the first one, amazing.
Yeah.
The ending scene where these chains rip this lady in half. It's
Spoiler alert.
brutal. And guess what happens to Sean Bean at that film? Just take a random guess.
Mutilated?
He dies in every film. He's the most killed off actor in Hollywood, I'm pretty sure. Boromir, he dies in Lord of the Rings. He dies in GoldenEye.
Lots of spoiler alerts.
He dies in everything that he's in.
He's a red shirt.
Yeah, he is a red shirt. You're right. But no, there was that was probably the only film that I think I loved. Now, you love to hate movies like Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah, I mean,
John Leguizamo and Bob Hoskins, and then Dennis Hopper is Koopa, who doesn't even look like Koopa at all. I don't even know how that movie got made.
I don't either.
So bad.
That was bad, yeah.
Yoshi looked like a mini raptor. So stupid.
Everything was terrible about that movie.
Was bad.
Now, going back to the mainstream thing, the argument against this, because there are people that are upset that gaming has become more mainstream, is that now, because more people are interested in gaming, you get a lot more content that it's not as good.
They're the elitist.
Yes. It's kind of that.
You can't have my hobby. You're not allowed to share in my hobby.
Yeah.
It's mine.
Now,
what are you doing playing that game? You should be playing something better because you're stupid and I have better taste than you. And I like to comment on YouTube because I think I'm important.
Which, if you disagree with us,
just comment on our video, but don't
care.
comment on other stupid things.
You can
Don't
tell us
argue
you
with
disagree
people. Stop arguing. Just don't argue with people. Make a point. Be nice about it. Be fair.
No.
If you're a jerk,
we'll do nothing about it.
We'll just let other people argue with you. I probably won't comment on it. But anyway, just just be civil with people. But that's not a thing anymore.
But there are people that are upset by the fact that more people are into gaming, and I don't understand why, because I would rather have, even if that's true, even if you make the case that because more people are into gaming now, studios will greenlight things more often, and publishers are putting out more frequently putting out worse games than they were, and the true gems are still few and far between. Even if that's the case, you still have those titles. So even if you want to be this elitist group that it used to be my thing, and me and this niche of people that can have these really good games, and we knew that they were a thing, you could still be that group, and now you're just with that group within the walls of an environment where people don't think what you're doing is nerdy.
Well, maybe it's what if there was this group of women across the world that were really mad because now they can't necessarily there's not this overload of rom-coms, right? So it's not just hear me out, okay? It's similar.
Okay.
So there's there used to be a romantic comedy every other day, I feel right? And especially when Hugh Grant was around.
True story. Every rom-com that has ever been made ever stars either Katherine Heigl or Jennifer Aniston. Every one. Doesn't matter what year you go to. You can go to movies.
Are you sure Hugh Grant isn't in most of those?
He is in most of those too. But you can go to any movie that's a romantic comedy, even before these people were born, and Katherine Heigl and Jennifer Aniston are still in them somehow.
Somewhere.
It is unbelievable.
Well, this is I guess I'm trying to make some sort of comparison. It's maybe a stretch, but so there's like this horde of women out there that were like, yeah, like rom-coms are like our thing. We can go to the movies and we can drag our husbands to them, right? And men are like, oh, this sucks. Like, we don't have any movies for us. And then like Marvel shows up and they're like, you like Iron Man and the Hulk and Thor and Spider-Man? And you're like, well, yes, of course I do. I'm a guy and I like those things. And you're like, well, there's lots of them. Go see all of them. Like, they just never end. And then women are like, well I don't want to. I want to go see a romantic comedy. You're like, well, you have to go and see a Marvel film with me now. It's like, so there's like this balance. Like, we've gotten our turn where I feel like if I'm an elitist gamer because I've been playing games since I was like, before I was born or some crap, and then like I played all these great games, have a lot of fond memories, I have a lot of knowledge, I want to share it, I want to have conversations with people, I want to, it's like a part of my life. And then there's all these other people that just got their games. Like, they got all these games that are made for them. And I'm like, you're wrong, all of you. My point is that I feel like those people got their turn, okay? Like, they have their time now. Now, granted, I still have the stuff I like.
Yeah.
But it's more of like, instead of being kind of formed into what I grew up on, like, and all the stuff that I appreciate and I think had a lot of value, and I think across the board, you would ask most people, and they would say, yeah, those games from that era had a lot of value, right? Like, there was something about them, whether they were really hard or they had some mechanic that was really fun, or they were based on a property you really liked or whatever. But then it was almost somewhat very centric. There was still, even though there was a lot of different games out there, they all kind of felt like they belonged together, right?
Yeah, it's a community.
Right.
I mean, you all, even if there's different interests within that community, there's always a community, and you feel like, great, we're kind of in this together, where maybe you can make the case that because it's becoming more mainstream, more people are getting involved, that sense of community has maybe changed because there are so many different...
I feel like genres have been created, right? Yeah. And so there's a genre for everything now, I feel like, which is also, in a sense, separates a lot of people into groups and like what you like. So it's like, do you like shooters? And I would actually answer that question, no. But I do like them. It just depends on what it is. But primarily, no, I don't like shooters. I would rather play an adventure game or an action adventure game. But at the same time, you can classify that like 7 different ways, A game like Bayonetta is different, or Devil May Cry is different than a Tomb Raider or an Uncharted, right? Like, those games are in the same kind of category, but there's like so many different like subgenres. It's great, don't get me wrong, but you just have to really do a lot of homework to be like, okay, I like this. Whereas then when, like, say, maybe like the crappier version of those better games comes out, but somehow is marketed better and becomes the next big thing, you're sitting here being like, this is why I hate mainstream gaming, because all those people are liking this crappy game and they're not playing the good one over here that no one's buying.
But I don't know.
And that's the elitist in me. So you know what I mean? It's not like
you just don't want the filthy casuals ruining your...
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, I don't want the filthy casuals buying all the bad games so that my good games get buried into a pile somewhere and no one finds them until they look up all the ETs in Arizona.
To me, I don't care. I mean, I think as long as they're still making the good games, I can find the games that I like. And I think that when you have more people purchasing games and the industry is thriving, you're ultimately going to lead to more games and more opportunities for games. So as long as everybody's doing well, I'm still going to win, even if I have to put up with people that like bad games or something in the mix.
Well, I guess where my fear is, it's not necessarily like this, I know the proper way that things need to be done and everyone needs to listen to me because I've been doing this long enough, right? It's more like, my fear is that if a good game doesn't sell well, then that will lead to a company saying there wasn't enough interest in this kind of game. And even though it was a critical success in terms of the way it was reviewed and all this other stuff, they're just not going to make it because it's not profitable, right?
Right. But what I'm saying is that if you have this select group of people within the gaming community, the one that was prior to being mainstream, that knew where the good games were and has this very high esteem for only good games, then you bring all these other people in, and even if the game's not marketed well or whatever it is, if they're really as good at identifying the good games and playing the good games as they believe they are to be, they're still finding those things. So either the group is not what it believes that it is, which kind of makes the whole point moot, or their life has gone on the same way that it was before. Just now, other people are also enjoying themselves, which also doesn't make their life any worse.
Let's I guess to make your point, to agree with your point. Okay, you have like the Oscars, right? And the Oscars is the elitist of Hollywood that decide what movies win awards.
Sure.
Fast and the Furious is a great movie that's a giant success. They've made 7 of them. They're huge. People love them. It's like
8,
this.
I think, now.
It might even be 8, yeah. I don't know. Anyway, there's a million of them. But there's so many, there's enough of them, and they've all done very well, and they just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that movie will never win an award for anything, ever.
I don't...
But at the same time, it has its audience. It's huge,
Have
right?
you seen those movies? The more recent ones?
One. I'm not a huge fan.
Listen...
But
and I can tell
they're amazing in the way they do everything.
No, you need to watch them because
are they bad?
The first movie you watch it because you appreciate the cars.
Sure.
The second movie you're like, I watched this because I appreciate the cars in the first movie and I thought this was going to be better than it is. The third movie you're like, this is very nichey. I'm kind of out of this. From the fourth one on, they have gotten to be legitimately good movies.
Really?
Yes. They're like Ocean's 11 now.
Yes. Okay. I was gonna say that I could see that comparison.
But that's exactly the point. That like you have like this franchise where maybe the game can start off like the first Fast and the Furious, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, this is not great, but I'm gonna give it a whirl because it seemed appealing and it got me into the genre.
Right.
It got me into gaming in this case. And it does well enough that they say, well, let's go bigger and better next time. And eventually you're looking at like a significantly good game. And I'm sure that's happened. I'm sure there's games out there where the first one is garbage, but then after they kind of find their footing, they're legitimately good titles.
Absolutely. But I guess I look at it whereas like the gaming elite is like the Hollywood elite, and they're not going to give awards to. I'm not literally saying awards, but it's like there's only a select group of games. Like it's like
they're not
only
give their
Zelda matters,
to,
and you know, any of the classics, and like all this new stuff is just it's popular because dumb people play it or something, and so they're like, well, we won't give any awards to that stuff. Like we'll give awards to the things that we feel matter. And I guess I can see where gaming elites are like that, right? Like if you've ever looked at any comment section on anything related to, like, we'll throw Nintendo out there because they have some of the most rabid fans. Everyone that loves Nintendo will defend them. And then there's a bunch of people that come in and they're just like, oh, a bunch of fanboys, like I expected. And it's like, I get why those people get mad at it because maybe they don't have the same attachment to it, right? Like, I feel like sometimes like my Nintendo was my life as I grew up. But there's enough people out there that don't maybe have that same attachment, and that's where their argument comes from. Is they're doing stupid things and they're making games for kids because they're cartoony and stuff. And it's like, man, when's the last time you 100%ed a Yoshi's Island game? I'd love to see anybody try that. That's freaking hard, dude. I mean, we're talking some of the hardest gameplay I've ever had. Yeah. We're talking months of gameplay trying to 100% one of these games. So they're out there. Those games can be found, and that may not necessarily look like they're meant for like maybe a hardcore audience, but there's always going to be a divide no matter what, right? Every brand deserves loyalty, and everyone's going to choose to be loyal to one, possibly two, possibly even just neutral to all three. And as I've gotten older, I've really started to try to become more neutral because I don't like being elitist. Now, I still want to encourage people to maybe say like, break from your mold. I know you like Call of Duty. I know you like sports games. I know you like racing. That's fine. Please just try something new. Yeah. See if you like it. Because where I have loved a game in every genre out there, easily, you know, I could name you at least one game from every genre that I have fallen in love with and has become like a classic to me. But
rom-com, go.
Rom-com.
Which Katherine Heigl / Jennifer Aniston movie?
The Breakup. No, that movie wasn't very good.
No, none of them were good.
That's fine. But anyway, like every genre has a game that I've loved, and that's because I've gone out and tried them. Yeah. And that is so important, and I cannot convince people to do that enough.
But you've been gaming for a long time, and video gaming has only been mainstream for a short period of time now. I think that those people will get there, and that's another reason why I think this is a good thing.
I don't know if they will, because I feel like the stuff that is coming out in, well, either the games are getting longer or they have more replayability.
But that's where the elitist group needs to be different, because you can either shun these people because it's like, oh, you're just playing another Call of Duty. It's garbage.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't help anybody. Or it's like, hey, if you really like that Call of Duty, you should try this game here because you might like that even better because
Sure.
it's kind of in the vein of what you like, whether it's Call of Duty or anything else. But here's this other thing. Help them expand their mind and help them try new things because that's
Right.
important. Now we can grow the community together just by saying I don't like that more people are into the thing that I like. I think just fractures the community more. It doesn't
Sure.
help anybody. For me, games are an art form, and they are...
Don't ever call them an art form.
They
They're
are
not an art form.
They are absolutely an art form. They are storytelling. They are visually appealing. There's a lot of work and time and creativity that go into it. It is an art form. It is a technical art form. And
All right, I'll buy it.
and people have these visions. I mean, some of these games that get made, it's something that is a passion inside somebody that has this idea for a story and they want to see it to fruition. And I can't remember the guy's name, but like the guy who made Gone Home.
I don't know the guy's name, but I know it. Yeah.
So like, you know, and
played
there's another one too that he just came up with. But I listened to an interview with him, and I wish I could remember his name. But the story he wanted to tell, I mean, it was something that meant something to him, and it was something that, you know, he had been thinking about and working on in his mind and in his notebook and all this stuff for a long time. And you finally get it to a point where you can get a team together and you build the story and you share that with somebody, and that can be. Don't get me wrong, not every game is going to be this way. There could be totally of just cash grab.
Well, there's an emotional genre out there, like an emotional experience, or whether it's like Dear Esther was one. The Vanishing of Ethan Carter.
Yeah.
There was Gone Home. There's That Dragon Cancer. There's like a bunch of like these emotional experiences that are based off of either a real life event or something that person felt that was
That
so
you can
poignant
relate
that they
to.
needed to
Yeah.
they needed other people to understand that like this is important to me. Whether
Like nobody's
You know.
crying over Sneak King. It's not happening.
I do every night.
But
Because when the king is in my bedroom staring at me,
that is terrifying.
that is a little scary.
But they have this sort of tie to these, and then you can express that. I think that's an art form, and when you can share a piece of art with somebody and then get them to experience what you're trying to get them to feel, I think that's huge. And by growing that, it's going to pull more people in, and anytime you can expand that, I think that's a win.
I don't want to make semantics out of this, but like art, in a sense, is not entertainment in a way, but maybe it is. Okay, now don't get me wrong; it can be taken a million different ways, but I've always just looked at this as like entertainment. But I like to use more of the word like feeling, and I like to use like emotion, right? So I like things that grab me, that become a part of me, that whether they shape my mind or they shape the way I feel about something. I guess art can do that. You know what I mean? It's stupid to even try to have this argument supposedly, but games have, to me, in a way, what I look for now is I look for games that affect me in some sort of way, whether they surprise me, excite me, make me emotional, teach me, make me learn about something I didn't know before. You know, I can't tell you how many words that I've learned over the course of the years that when I hear them, I'm like, I learned that from a game. I know what that is. Like, I would have never known that had I not played this game. And like, there's cool things like that. And so there's a lot of lessons that I have learned over the years just from playing games. And I think even like, what is it? Like there's even some like potential benefits, right? Like to it, like gaming does increases like your cognitive abilities and things like that, right? So there are lots of benefits, but of course everything in moderation.
Well, of course,
right?
yeah.
So you got to be careful with what you do. You can't just sit there for 14 hours and play games.
As nice as it would be. Yeah.
Right. Well, when you're married, you can't.
That's true. You won't be married for very long if you do. Well, to close out, I'll leave you with this. So if you need further proof that it is mainstream now, there was a time, 2002, the average gamer played 72 hours of video games a year, which doesn't sound like a lot for some, but this is an average.
One game
everybody.
now.
But that's what everybody, it's an average, right?
Okay.
Because some people play more casual games and others whatever, and there are plenty of games to your point, which would be whatever. 2013, that had jumped up to 142 hours for the average gamer. So that whole dynamic is just that
Doubled.
Yes, that whole category of people is just increasing, and it's becoming more and more of a piece of our life.
Yeah.
And I think that's cool, and I think that's great.
Well, it makes me feel more accepted. Like I can have this conversation with people.
Yeah.
Though I'll tell you, like sometimes the worst is when. Have you ever been on a job interview and ever had to bring up your gaming hobby by any chance?
No, and I don't know that I'm even at a place that I would do that.
But like, not only that, but like, or you even talking to like family sometimes or something, and like you bring it up, you know, and like primarily a lot of my life has been involved with gaming. So when I have to have these conversations with people who don't know what it is or can't relate, it's still very difficult. And and until this day, it still makes me feel like I have made the wrong choices in life. You know what I mean? Like it's like instead of playing games, you should have gone to business school or something. It's more, or like, you know, maybe you should play sports or cut your grass. You know, like things that adults do. And I'm like, I've always hated that. That's how I felt when I was a kid. Because I never felt like anyone understood me. Now I feel like people understand me, but there's still those instances where it feels embarrassing in a way.
Yeah, I mean, you have to know your audience to a point, right?
Absolutely.
Because, and that's true of anything. I love basketball, but I'm not going to talk basketball to everybody. There's plenty of people that I know that don't care about basketball.
Right.
So just like your scenario with, you know, a job or whatever.
But like this coming up that we've all been that we've essentially been talking about, like, right, like this rise of popularity. If it's such a big part of my life, I do want to share it with people. And I'm not saying, like, basketball's been around forever, and I get your analogy here, but...
But I'm just saying, like, right now, you're talking about going to a job interview and you can't talk to the employer about your video game thing.
Well,
but in 20 years from now, maybe
more
you're
along
the
the
guy
line.
who's hiring,
Right.
and you can't, and that person that you're interviewing can talk to you about it because it's that circle of life thing, right?
Sure.
Where you've become that... It's become part of your life, and now as you go through, the people who are not really into it still have kind of moved out of the workplace or whatever the scenario
It's
may
more
be.
of just like when, you know, again, like based on like sometimes like my employment, right? Like I have to bring it up in the course of interview conversations. This is why I bring it up, because you're always like, how do I talk about this nerdy, fun entertainment thing and make it sound like I'm qualified for a position, right? That's been a difficult thing for me for my entire life. But even like sometimes when I'm on a job with other people, I'm like, I get to meet new people, and I'm like, oh yeah, like you play anything? And they're like, no. And I'm like, oh, great. And I'm like, I don't know what else to talk to you about. How about them Indians? You know, do you like baseball? Nope. Do you like to wash the dishes? Clean your house? I don't know what other people, like, what else do people do? I have no clue. But
You hand make tables.
yeah. But I guess, like, for me, that because it's mainstream, it's starting to make me feel a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah.
And I guess I can relate to that, like, feeling like a little bit secluded or embarrassed maybe sometimes. And I think that that's helping, because it's getting me, you know, I always want, let's put it this way. I love talking games. You can obviously tell. But I really want to share the experiences in life that I've had. Some of the most amazing moments in my life have come from games. Things that I will never forget, you know? And I want to share that with people. I want to be able to have that exchange with somebody where they're like, yes, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And I think it's a cool thing when you find something that you can have that conversation with.
Yes.
And the more people that get involved in that sort of recreation, the more opportunities that will present.
Sure.
So how can you lose? But
Right. And that's where, like, I may still think, all right, you guys need to go out there and play these classics or like various games that come out, like they really deserve more attention. And I'm like, please just buy this game. And there's not enough people doing that. But at the same time, for all those people out there that are playing these games, or in general, any kind of game, if I can somehow find a way to relate to them, because again, I can talk about any genre, any subgenre, any kind of game system, whatever, whether it's young or old, I can have that conversation with you, and I want to, because I feel like it gives us common ground to at least start a conversation.
yeah. Well, we want to know what you think. So let us know in the comments. Do you believe that it's mainstream like we do? Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Where does it go from here? Like this video, subscribe, tell your friends about it, and we'll be back with segment 2 shortly.
I think it goes from here where our next president becomes an actual arcade machine.
I'm in. All right, I'll buy that movie ticket. Let's do it.
All right.
We'll be back in a minute.